Hello and welcome to another episode of Bolt Action Reloading. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Hornady Lock and Load Neck Turn Tool and how you might use it on your reloading bench. Stick around. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here and you want to learn how I and the rest of the community here make our group smaller, start now by subscribing to the channel and click the bell icon. That way you get notified when I post new videos and you won't miss anything. Like I mentioned, the topic for today's episode is a Lock and Load Neck Turning Tool by Hornady. I've actually had this in my possession for a while, and I really haven't used it all that much, and as we go through the video, you'll find out why. Before we get into exactly how we're going to use it today, I thought I would cover a couple things. This is not exactly a tool you're going to pick up from the store and start using it immediately. A couple things can be taken for granted. Depending on what caliber you're wanting to neck turn, you may have to look to see if you're going to need a different mandrel. There's actually 4 mandrels that come with this set in 22 caliber, 6mm, 6.5, and 30 cal. While that will cover a lot, it may not be everything. So, like me, you might have to pick something up like one for 3/38. Another thing that's very important to consider, since this product is manufactured by Hornady, actually all of the components you need to buy are pretty much going to be working around Hornady parts, and that also includes the shell holder. This piece of equipment actually comes with no shell holders. So, keep in mind, if you're not already reloading with Hornady shell holders, you're going to have to pick a set up for whatever you need. In this particular case, I picked up my own set because I didn't already have them. Not a big purchase, but again, something to consider. I want to pause for 1 second, guys, and mention that please keep in mind during this video, this is what the considerations that I feel are important to use the Hornady Neck Turn Tool. Everyone might not agree with me, and again, I'm sure it depends on what results you're looking for and what your expectations are. However, trying to use this to its fullest potential, I want it to do the best job that it possibly can. Why I say that is because of my next comment. I want you to keep in mind that we just talked about the mandrel. This mandrel is actually sized 2/1000 underneath whatever the caliber size you're reloading. In this particular case, if you're a fan of the channel, you're aware that I do a lot of 6.5 creedmoor, so 6.5mm is what we're talking about today, or 0.264 inches. That being said, the actual size of this mandrel is 0.262 inches. Depending on the size of your expander ball inside your sizing die, this may actually oversize the neck size, and it might actually provide excessive wobble on the mandrel if not sized appropriately. So, how do we size that appropriately? Well, guys, if you really want to see how I do it in great detail, I'll put up my die video. You can go take a look at that. But the short answer is, typically I actually full-length size without the expanding mechanism in it, and then I actually use the Sinclair mandrel die with a turning mandrel in it, and I can put a link to that video as well if you want to go check more about this. So it actually opened up to precisely that 0.262 inches. Guys, I really don't believe that you're going to be able to get a consistent neck turn on your brass without performing this operation. But again, this is my opinion. Another way that I will actually venture away from the pack in this particular video is specifically when most people talk about neck turning, they recommend doing it on a brand new lot of brass. This is not going to be the case for us today, nor what I feel is the best opportunity to, again, get the best performance possible. I'm not telling you to go fire your brass 6 times before you do this operation, but I believe that keeping concentricity in mind, that the concentricity should actually improve after your first firing, assuming you have a rock-solid reloading process, and you should actually have better concentricity on your first size rounds after your first firing. Full disclosure, guys, I do cheat. If you also see on the table, I have an amp annealing machine, or AKA annealing made perfect. Typically, after every single reload, I will actually anneal my brass. This being the case, I feel just about at any given time after any firing, I can anneal that brass and get it pretty close to where it was from the factory, and I can get that soft brass that we actually do want to use for our neck turning operation. If you guys are not going to anneal, you may think about doing it on your brass before your initial firing, or certainly after only one firing has occurred and after that initial sizing operation and the neck turning mandrel is used. Please keep in mind that it actually should be a turning mandrel, not an expander mandrel. Only the turning mandrel is 2/1000 underneath the actual diameter, which is what we need in this case. As you'll notice before we put it on, this is all sized brass, and actually with my fingers, I can't actually get that case to ride on there. When we put our drill motor on here and we lube this up, it'll flow in there just perfect, and this mandrel will hold it tight to the blade and ensure we have a nice consistent trim on our neck. Another reason why I feel that having an initial firing is important is for this operation to work correctly, it is absolutely necessary that all these cases be trimmed to exactly the same length. Being off by 1, 2, or more thousandths It may possibly allow you to cut into the shoulder when you don't want to, simply because when you adjusted your stop, it may not be adjusted correctly for the entire lot of brass that you're working with. In this particular case, I've already actually annealed, resized, and used the expander mandrel on all these brass, so it's already ready to go. In addition, I've actually turned some of the necks on these already to make sure all of my setup was correct, my stop is set correctly, and the depth that I want to cut in the brass is selected correctly. But we're going to cover that a little bit before we go. Obviously, we have a couple other tools on the table besides the neck turn tool. So, we'll talk about those. The concentricity gauge. Why do I have the concentricity gauge on the table? I do think it's very important that when you perform this operation, you're doing it on concentric brass. If your process is not yielding very concentric sized brass, I do not believe that you will get the most out of this operation. During my initial tries with this, before I had my reloading process tuned in very well, and I tried to use the neck turning tool, I actually saw quite a bit of variation in my neck turn. Therefore, I feel it wasn't worth doing at that point. So, guys, this brass has been ran over my concentricity gauge, and let me show you real quick exactly what I mean. When you pick out a piece of brass out of your lot, you should be able to get, after your resizing operation is done, you should see less than 1/1000 in variation from your neck. If you don't start with concentric brass, I don't believe your neck turning operation will be as effective. But again, guys, that's my opinion. Feel free to do whatever you decide to do. One thing that would also be helpful for the concentricity tool, guys, you can actually do measurements on the neck wall thickness on your brass so you can determine the high and low spots on your brass. If you perform your sizing operation and then the mandrel, you should be able to spin our concentricity gauge, and then you will actually be able to tell when the needle moves up and down what the highs and low spots in the case wall are. You should be able to take a tool like the ball micrometer from RCBS and take the measurements on these two spots and find out that there's actually almost 1/1000th in this piece of difference in neck wall thickness, which is actually accounting for why our constant measurements are what they are. One other thing of minor note, obviously this operation is going to require this to be in a pretty sturdy setup. I'm not saying you have to have one of these mounts from inline fabrication, but it sure bolts it nice and tight to your reloading bench. At a minimum, you're either going to want to screw this to your reloading bench or secure it in some fashion, because not having this secured is just not going to allow you to perform the operation the way you're going to want to. All those details out of the way, let's start doing some neck turning. So guys, I'm going to do my best to work around the camera. There's really nothing super fancy going on here. The only thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a cordless drill, just going to attach the drill so we can start turning our brass. I've actually found a little bit better, though it's not perfect, if you actually set it into the mandrel and then tighten it down, it actually tends to reduce how much out of round it is. But again, when it's on the mandrel, it still holds it pretty tight anyway. And obviously, guys, if you read the manual, you'll know that lubrication is paramount. We don't want to drown this thing in oil, but we don't want the cutting head to be running dry either. And in addition to that, there also is an oiling point right here. So I actually have a little bit of lubrication in there, and that will be plenty. For this particular case, I'm using just a little bit of 3-in-1 oil. I think I would be using cutting oil, but this is what I had handy. I actually just apply a little bit of oil to a Q-tip. And oil the neck of where I intend to cut, as well as the mandrel. These do not need a heavy coat of oil, but a light coat of oil goes a long way. Now, one other thing that's not perfectly clear to me when I was reading the manual is the actual speed. Guys, depending on how much material you're moving at one point might very well dictate how fast you want to go. One other point that I didn't mention earlier, this is adjusted in clicks, and if you listen very close, you will hear that there's a detent in there when you adjust that falls into clicks. Each click is about 1/1000th. Depending on how deep you actually want to cut these is going to determine where your setting is. 1/1000th actually isn't very fine resolution when it comes to neck turning. A similar product from a company called 21st Century Shooting, their neck turner allows you to set it to 1/10,000th. So guys, let's do our first piece. As I'm sure you could tell, I actually never left this first speed. However, when performing this, I actually like to go slow until I've done one complete cut so that cutting edge is not removing too much material at one time, and then I go back and clean it all up after one pass is complete. And while the entire neck isn't shiny, most of it is, and that's how we actually have this setting. Not having a finer resolution, we kind of have to make a sacrifice to the thickness that we actually cut this to. I'll back it off one click. We'll show you guys what it looked like 1/2 thousandth less than the last cut we did. So hopefully you guys can plainly see that it actually did not remove material at all from one side of the neck, and it did some from the other. So actually cutting one more 1/2 thousandth will actually clean most of this up. However, had we had finer resolution, we might have only picked 2 or 3 thousandths in addition to this to leave our neck walls as thick as possible. Though it didn't take it all, obviously you can see much more material was removed. That neck should be a lot more consistent. Here you guys can watch me do one more, and then we'll get to our conclusion. One other thing that's important of note is that this brass should not be getting too hot. If it's getting too hot, you're either going too fast or you don't have enough lubrication on your blade. If this is getting warm, please keep in mind as when it gets warm, everything expands, which is actually going to, in the end, remove more material from your neck and will increase the inconsistency in your operation. And of note, guys, when you can probably see this better, this mandrel is actually screwed into this, and that's how the adjustment for the stop is. This actually comes in and out so you can stop that blade right before you hit the shoulder so you don't take any material out of the shoulder. Some people are going to tell you actually want to hit the shoulder, but it's up to you how you want to adjust it. It's your reloading process, but you can see exactly how far I'm trimming it, and that's exactly how far I intended to trim it. And there you have it, another trimmed case. Let's zoom back out. So guys, a couple more important things before we get done for today. One thing, like I mentioned, I've actually had this a while. When I first tried to set this up, and I'll throw some photos on the screen, I actually had some significant problems setting it up. Number one, the original cutter that came in this was actually very crooked. Putting a shot on your screen, you'll better understand, and then I'll show you a picture of the brass as well. As the turning operation was being completed, it was leaving rings inside the brass, and it certainly wasn't cutting even. As I was very disappointed, I actually reached out to another YouTuber and asked some questions, and his direct response was, "Something's wrong, contact Hornady." And to be fair to Hornady, I actually called Hornady. The guy on the phone didn't really understand what I was trying to tell him. However, he said, "Send me a photo." After I sent him a photo that I'm showing you guys on here, immediately he said the cutter head needs to be replaced. Shipped me out a new one, and within a week, I have my new cutter. So, just for reference, guys, if you're watching this video because you've had problems, certainly make sure that your cutting head is parallel to your mandrel. If it's not, contact Hornady and they'll make it right. This is exactly what the cutting head looks like. So guys, all in all, retail price, it's a little over $100. If you can find a coupon code or a sale, you might be able to get it for a little bit cheaper. But having a neck turning lathe you can actually hook to your drill is a nice feature. However, I am a little disappointed with the lack of adjustability. Like I mentioned, 21st Century Shooting actually has, their neck turning cutter actually has the ability to do 1/10,000th. But as you guys can notice, we've actually turned exactly 25 of our 50 rounds out of this lot. So you might ask, well, what are we only doing half a lot? Because guys, we're going to do another test. If you guys are interested in neck turning or even thinking about neck turning, subscribe to the channel and look out for a video coming down the road talking about should you neck turn. We're going to find out if all this is in vain or not, if we're going to see any improvement in our load process or results from our rifle by actually performing this operation. If that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos. If you have any comments or questions on the video today, please put those in the comments section below. If you're not subscribed to the channel and you like the content, consider subscribing, hit the like button. Make sure you tune in next week, and until then, stay safe in small groups.